Hey everybody, it's Mike Jeff for Chicago Jazz Magazine, ChicagoJazz.com, and welcome to this month's feature interview. It is my honor to be sitting down with Bobby Broom, legendary guitarist here. He is known worldwide. He has played throughout the world, which we're going to talk about. The recordings, the history that he has that we're going to talk about is going to be incredible. Before we get into all of that, though, you have a brand new gig, which is pretty exciting because I know education is a big part of your professional career as well as playing.
Absolutely.
And you're now at NIU, Northern Illinois University, as part of the Jazz Studies program out there. What's the official title? And
Yeah.
you know, you're better off talking about it than me.
A little bit. It's all new, but the official title is Assistant Professor of Jazz Studies, Jazz Guitar. And like you said, I've been teaching for years, really since the beginning of my career. I started teaching way back in the 80s under the auspices of Jackie McLean at the Hart School of Music, University of Hartford, when I still lived in New York, and I was about 22 years old when I started doing that. And so I've been teaching ever since. For the most part, I had 6 or 7 years tenure at not a tenure, but a stint at DePaul University, Roosevelt University. I started here in Chicago at the American Conservatory of Music. I was there for 5-6 years. So I usually have a position somewhere, and it was in probably 2004-05 that I got I woke up one morning with a burning desire to get my master's degree, simply to honor that area of my life and career. I devoted all these years to being an educator and grown into one, really. Mm-hmm. And I thought I should have the credentials to honor that. I wasn't necessarily interested in a full-time position at that point, really. So I got my master's, and a handful of years after I had it, I started to see the climate shift in terms of musicians having hard positions. And I felt, well, I should too, because I've devoted my life, as I said, to this area, and I can do it.
Yeah.
And so I applied myself and applied, and it was a process which lasted about 7 years. I was finalist candidate 5 times. This was my 5th finalist candidacy, which means you visit the university, they fly you out and interview you for the day, and you do some teaching, and they observe you and talk to you and that kind of thing. So I was even up for the chair of the guitar program at Berklee College of Music, which is my alma mater of a year at least. That was my first year of college 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So that was a trip.
I find it interesting, though, because somebody like you, right? I mean, you started playing professional, I think I read when you were 16.
Pretty much.
Right, yeah. Right around there. Yeah. But then you're right, because it's one of those trends. All of a sudden, everybody started to get, but you had to have a master's or a bachelor's and a master's in order to get like a position at a college.
When?
Well, recently.
Yeah.
Recently. Not back then, but recently.
Yeah, back then it was still basically new.
Yeah, but what I find interesting, though, is that you still have that burning desire to teach and educate, even though, you're touring all around the world. You're opening up for Steely Dan. You're playing gigs in Europe. You're doing this, that. But you still have that burning desire to teach because most people don't. That's something just special, right? That you have to really want to do.
Yes. You have to really want to do it. And I'll tell you, in the beginning of my teaching career, I had to do it because it was a means to making a living. Want to do it? Not really. I wasn't quite comfortable in my own skin yet at that point, and I definitely wasn't comfortable assuming the role of a knowledgeable, experienced musician slash educator. I had more experience and maybe knowledge than my students, but I was just a couple of years older than them.
Yeah, right.
And I just still had so much more that I wanted to do in the field of performing, and I felt like maybe I wasn't going to get a chance to do it, or I was missing out on something by sitting in a room with a student, and so it's just I had to learn, and I also had to grow into a comfort level, or just a place of comfort internally as a mentor, a teacher, and feel confident and comfortable about being that person, which came, maybe in my mid-30s, where I started to think like, I have something to give back.
But the other thing too, and I've talked to some of the people that have studied with you over the years and played with them and everything else, but they all talk about how you can explain what you're doing. That's a rarity sometimes in teaching, right? Because, to be able to talk about stuff and explain kind of high-level stuff, and for them to be able to understand that's kind of a gift to be able to do that. Is that something you consciously thought about when you were putting your whole teaching concept together? Or?
It's something I thought about when I was putting my playing together.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. I was blessed with a dual upbringing. I was educated in school, right? When I started playing the guitar, I simultaneously took music theory lessons. Like I took an elective class in my junior high school.
Junior high? Okay.
So I was 12 or 13 years old. And I decided, well, if I'm going to play the guitar, which I just wanted to strum, I wasn't trying to be serious, but I thought if I'm going to play music, I want to understand music. So I'm going to take this after-school elective class in music theory. Yeah.
Like a masochist.
What kind of weird kid is that? So I know. It's funny to think back on that. But that's what I did. And then, it just kind of grew from there. I went to the arts high school in New York, the Fame School of Music and Art.
Yeah.
And, all of that stuff was required. To be a student there, you had to take music theory, Western music history, and all of this serious stuff. So
I'm curious. So you had to audition to get in that school, right? So you're competing against a lot of people, I would imagine.
Yeah. But it was a public school, and the auditions were, you had to have some talent, but they weren't crazy hard. So. I've had a lot of music theory in my life. So when it came time, and a lot of private lessons, I took private lessons for 3 or 4 years, from the age of 12 to, well, maybe that's too long, because 12 and then 13, 14, 15, about 4 years, maybe 3, 4 years. So by the time I started to get serious about jazz, I didn't have a teacher. And so I was figuring it all out on my own, but with a strong foundation. And so I was working it all out for myself using music theory and formulating these ways of understanding what I was doing. So that's why I can explain it.
Well, and talking about that, though, too, while you're doing that, you must have developed your ear incredibly, right? So you get to a certain point where you're understanding it, you're hearing it, because in your playing now, you can totally tell you are well ahead of you're harmonically above, below, wherever you want to go. Because listening to you play with a trio is different than listening to other guitar players play with a trio, period. But, with your ear must have been totally developed at that point, or at least really, substantially developed, right?
Well, in a way, in a way.
You won't agree, but I think so.
In a certain way, it was really developed, because I could sit in with people and play tunes on the fly that I was just hearing right now, or tunes that I had heard but not played. But in terms of like, sing me a major sixth, I might still, I can't. But I remember being in music class or being amongst friends in high school and being laughed at because my ear was so sad.
Really?
Oh yeah. I was always the saddest guy in the groups that I hung out with. Yeah,
But that probably gave you motivation to get better.
Yeah,
right?
I wanted to be able to hang. So,
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
So in high school, are you starting to play gigs? You're starting to play professional gigs now?
I was playing professionally in my senior year of high school. I had a group of some neighborhood guys and some guys from my high school. We did a talent show at Music and Art. And a gentleman was there backstage kind of lurking around. And we were like, who is this old dude back here kind of lurking around? Well, it was Weldon Irvine, who was the musical director for Nina Simone. And he's written tunes for Freddie Hubbard and Mr. Clean. Are you familiar with the tune, right? So he composed that. What else is he just? Well, he was a playwright at the time. He had written this play, and he was looking for young kid musicians to play some roles in this play, and if they were good enough to play in the pit, to play the music for the play. So at the end of the night, he approached us, a few of the guys in my band, and asked us if we wanted to audition, told us who he was, and we were like, wow, okay, cool. He was probably 30 years old at the time, and we were like, who's this old dude,
guy? Yeah, right, yeah.
So yeah, that's where my professional career started. We played in Brooklyn, this off-Broadway theater. The play was called Young, Gifted, and Broke, and it was based on the song that he co-wrote. Or I think he co-wrote the lyrics with Nina Simone, Young, Gifted, and Black, a big 70s anthem for Black America. And we ran for like 9 months.
Wow.
And it was like 4 nights a week, whatever that is, and a matinee on Saturday and Sundays, and I was getting checks rolling in.
A full-time gig.
It was a full-time gig.
While
and
you're
I was
in
high school. Yeah,
wow.
yeah. So from there, he was a mentor. He was a mentor to a lot of us in the New York area, young musicians, especially in Queens, New York, which is where he lived, and a lot of the musicians were from and doing things. So I remember he was the first one to take me out to go sit in. I didn't even know what that meant. And after the play one night, he says, come on, call your mom, tell her we're going to go out and sit in. Called my mom and said, hey, we're going to go out. And Weldon's taking me out to sit in. She said, what's that? I said, I don't know. I'll tell you when I get back home. So we sat in I sat in. That's because Weldon had his melodica. And we went to see Al Haig. And I knew who Al Haig was by that point. Cause we walk up to the marquee, and I'm like, Al Haig, he played with Charlie Parker, piano, So I'm freaking out a little bit. And Weldon goes up and talks to him, and he comes back. He's a little forlorn. And I'm like, what happened? He said, well, he said no to the melodica. Can you imagine? But he said you could sit in. So he said the kid can sit in. So I sat in, and I must have done okay because he invited me to play with him, to sit in with him, to come. He had a regular, like a steady 4-night-a-week gig on Upper East Side, and he said, whenever you want, come on. He should have never told me that because I was there like pretty much every night.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I had a 12 o'clock curfew, from my parents. But as long as I had my homework done, I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. And I was learning tunes, and do you know this tune? And I'm like, yeah, no, not really. But,
Was he one of those guys, though, that would tell you that you don't know that tune and you better go check that tune out? He would just let you kind of fumble around if you didn't know it?
No, it was not a lot but fumbling. Okay. I wasn't a fumbler. Not to say it like that. Like, I'm not being, but I wasn't... Like if I didn't feel comfortable, I would not play.
Yeah.
And so he knew that too, and he said, "You just listen to it until you can feel comfortable. You listen to a chorus or two, and when you feel like then come on in." I was like, "Okay."
Yeah.
And like I said, my ears were good enough that I could hear chord progressions by that time. So that's it.
Yeah.
And I just play behind him, and then he'd let me solo, and I'd do the best I could, which was okay, I guess. He wasn't cringing, and he invited me there. There's a certain, that says a certain thing. And I know now from being like, his age or older now than he was when he was doing that for me, that when you hear somebody that has a certain amount of ability it's so endearing, and you want to help them, but they have to have a certain amount of ability.
Sure.
You don't want them clanking all over the place.
Right.
So.
Was that, and I'm always curious too, because talking to musicians like that have done so much like yourself, and so many tunes and everything, but learning tunes, did you like consciously sit down and learn tunes, or is it because your ear was so developed? You probably listen to the radio, you listen to tunes all the time, listen to things.
Yes.
You just pick them up that way. You didn't just sit with a system and learn the.
Partially, I did learn tunes. I knew that was part of the prerequisite and part of the practice of jazz is to have, there's a certain repertoire that we need to know, and there are hundreds of tunes, and I know maybe 50 of them. I don't know. It's like not. I never was like, okay, I'm going to learn 5 tunes a week. And
right. Yeah. Right.
I was never that kind of student. But and sometimes you learn by doing, and that's what I learned from Al Haig. That's what I learned from my first jazz guitar teacher.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest lesson I took from him. His name was Jimmy Carter. He taught up in Harlem, and learn by doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, growing up at that time too in New York,
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of like a sweet time. There was a lot of guys
A lot different.
performing in town regularly, like Al Haig.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you go from sitting in with Al Haig to all of a sudden starting to play gigs as a sideman, let's say,
Yeah.
not leading your own group, but what were some of the steadies or some of those things that all of a sudden something popped? And you were like, they were hiring Bobby Broom to come in and play with their group.
I don't know. Word must have gotten around because, it's a fraternity. Jazz is a fraternity, and people talk. We all are in touch. And so something must have leaked. and because, it was a kind of a, happenstance. I was doing the play one night, and a gentleman approached me and introduced himself. R.L. Ray was his name. He said, I'm a guitarist. I play with Sonny Rollins. I'm like, oh, cool. I know. I've heard of Sonny Rollins. And he says, yeah. So we talk. He says, you sound good, blah, blah, blah. End of the conversation. So I want you to go to this address, and I want you to play with Sonny Rollins. I want you to audition, he said, for Sonny Rollins. And I said, well, wait a minute. You said you're the guitar player for Tsega. What are you doing? He said, no, he's going to be looking for another guitar player. Okay. So it made no sense, but I was not going to take him up on off, so I went, and that's how I met Sonny.
Isn't that wild, though? Just like nowadays, would that ever happen? Probably not, right?
Yeah,
Would
good.
it? Yeah? You think so?
Yeah. Because, like I said, but people talk, and so, I don't know the details, and if he just happened to be there, or I don't know.
Right,
but
So you
it could happen.
And he was
I walked in, and there he was with Bob Cranshaw and Eddie Moore, and it was just a trio and Sonny, and we played for an hour, and then he asked me to join the band. Yeah, which I couldn't. I was in high school, so I told him, well, I can't because, I have to finish high school. Oh, yeah, that's right, he said, so I'll call you when I get back to New York. Okay, so cool. I didn't know what that meant, like he's going to call to chat. So he did call and asked me to play Carnegie Hall with him.
Wow.
He had a concert with Donald Byrd and Sonny's
Is that the
band.
first gig you played with him?
Yes.
At Carnegie Hall?
Yes.
Wow.
I know, isn't that crazy?
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, so it's like right before my 17th birthday.
But wouldn't you think, right? Sonny Rollins playing Carnegie Hall.
At that point, you don't think.
No, yeah, right. But like, if Bobby Broom's playing Carnegie Hall with his group, would you call up a high school kid that you kind of jammed with before for a minute and, hey, you know what? There's a million other guitar players I could call, but I've never played a gig with you. Why don't you come play with me at Carnegie Hall? That's like...
that kind of encapsulates Sonny Rollins right
right?
there. Yeah. I don't know. I might if I thought something. I don't know what he was thinking.
Right?
I might. People might. Yeah, sure.
But it almost goes to Sonny always pushing forward, right? Always pushing the limits, not worried about playing it safe, right?
No,
Yeah.
he was way beyond that. He'd
Yeah.
done all his greatest work
Right.
already.
Right.
That's my humble opinion. I mean, I was just glad to be there and wondering why I was oftentimes. yeah, and trying to learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he was doing something. I stopped trying to figure out what it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was it when you first started playing with him? Was that the beginning of like a steady run with? Because you had 2 different runs with him, right?
Yes.
He reconfigures
Yes.
his band a lot, anyways. I think, but you had 2 5-year stints. I think,
Yes.
right? Is that
Yes.
right? Was that the beginning of the first one?
In a way. So I was still in high school. I had to graduate and go off to college. So I went to Berklee College of Music, and his band, actually it was an all-star band. They had just done a record for Milestone Fantasy Records. It was the Milestone All-Stars. So it was Sonny, Ron Carter, Al Foster, McCoy, and I think that was it. And Donald Byrd was on this show. They came to Berklee Performance Center in Boston. And, I was like, I know I'm going to that show. I must have bought a ticket. I had to have bought a ticket because I don't think I called Sonny and asked him.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought my ticket. I had my parents send me some money, And I did get backstage, though. I'd had that kind of confidence. Like,
Yeah.
I know him, so I'm telling Bobby Broom is here.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then I got backstage, and so I saw him again, saying that to say that I saw him again. The following year, a year or so after we played, he was very happy to see me, and then that was it. And then I went back home. So that year, I went back to New York after the first year of college because I was like, I'm going back home.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to beat everybody else. Everybody's talking about going to New York, and plus my friends that stayed at home were starting to play on records and stuff, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh
You're
my
like,
God.
why am I in college?
Yeah, I'm going to school. I was in college because my parents were going to kick my butt if I didn't go to college. My mother was a teacher. My father didn't graduate high school. So it was like between the two of them, I was going to go to college. So I found a college in New York and, kind of feigned going to college. And meanwhile, I'm trying to, play as much as possible. So that's what I did, and I wound up, through playing in people's bands and making some records. The record label got interested in this young kid, and I got a record deal. And the story is that Sonny saw an ad for my record in the New York Times or something, and, oh, Bobby, right, let me call him, and called me at that point and asked me to join his band.
But you just put out a new recording, and you got a
Well,
record
it was
deal, right?
yeah,
So
it was. Let's see. So it was out because I started back with him started with him in earnest in 1982.
Okay.
So the record had been out a year,
Mm-hmm.
and there wasn't that much happening for me. I didn't have like real sufficient management and no kind of like real industry push.
Right.
It was more like a novelty thing for this label. It was GRP Records, and right. Yeah, but there was their nascent kind of period. They had done they were a production team for Blue Note Records in the late 70s. They did Earl Clue's first record and this violinist John Lucien. Oh wait a minute, yeah, John Lucien. Was he a violinist or a singer? Anyway. That was a long time ago. And so they were the production team for Blue Note, and then they moved to form their own label and imprint, and they got distribution from Arista Records.
Yep.
Right, and Clive Davis.
Yeah.
So that's when they were trying to build their label, and they signed a bunch of us youngsters that were playing and could play. Talented youngsters around the New York area, and I would,
Yeah, I mean, you were.
I was out there.
Yeah, you were out there and stuff.
Yeah.
But then Sonny calls you.
Sonny calls, and it was like, that's because that was, man. I remember I had that concert that I went to see at Berklee that night. First of all my heroes are up on stage,
right.
and I'm just sitting there, and Sonny is playing with that intensity, and I'm just like on the edge of my seat, like, Sonny, don't burst a blood vessel, like, cool out, man. Is it? And then at one point I got kind of full. I got misty. I was like, I wanted to play with him so badly for real, like to be in his band, and I had to leave the concert for a while and go to my dorm and get myself together. And
No
then
kidding.
Go, yeah,
Wow.
because it was that strong, and go back to the concert and finish watching, and then go backstage. And so, yeah, there's a burning desire to play with him.
So he called you. He saw it in the New York Times and
It
called
happened. Yeah. So that's when it started in '82. I was ready to go.
you. Sure.
Yeah.
And at that point, he was touring a lot, right? I mean, it was like prime time. Sonny was like on the road.
He was always very selective. That's when his wife Lucille was his manager, and they were always very selective in what they did. So he wasn't touring 200, not like Dr. John when I was doing that.
Yeah, right.
250 shows a year. Like, I was never home. But he worked a lot.
Yeah.
And he worked enough, and so it was good.
What did playing with like a master like that? I mean, first of all, you're playing with somebody like that. Is he giving you tips? Is he telling you anything, or is he just like, because some of those guys are just like, Bobby, just do what you do, man.
Yeah,
or
well, that's what he was.
Yeah.
I can probably count in one hand the musical direction that he ever gave me. It was like nil. He was very encouraging when needed, because he could tell if I was down. Bobby was wrong, like I suck. Oh no, I don't hear it like that, And sometimes when you feel like that, you're making a breakthrough. I remember him saying that to me once. I remember him saying, I remember one night we hadn't played for a while. It had been a month or two or whatever where we hadn't gigged, and I was eager to get back with him. And I remember feeling after the gig like, man, I just had musical diarrhea. I just played like everything all at once. And man, that was the next night. Sonny hands me a news clipping with a favorable review, and I was included in the review, and that was just his way of giving me a nod. So he was very subtle.
He's real intuitive then, huh? You could tell what was going on, and could feel it. Yeah.
He was very, very intuitive, very subtle, very. Like I said, he rarely gave direction at that point. Now the second time around was a little different, but but the first time around he was just letting me figure it out.
Yeah.
And one time though, one time I called myself like getting fancy and playing the chord melody on the ballad behind him playing the melody. Like, what? Don't. Okay, so I didn't know, that maybe that wasn't cool, and that Sonny Rollins had let him play the melody with the phrasing that he wants to. You don't try to. So we got to the end of the phrase where the big root note hits, and he turned around and played a half step up really loud right in my face, and I literally jumped. And I was like, okay.
Subtle.
Yeah, well, yeah. To the audience, maybe.
So you're with him for 5 years, the first run, and then did it just kind of run its course at that point? Like you're like, you know what, I'm going to kind of go pursue my own stuff and get some other things happening?
Yeah, how did that end that time? Yeah, it was just time to, 5 years is a long time.
Yeah.
So he moved on, and I moved to Chicago.
How did that happen? How did you end up coming to Chicago from New York?
Yes, all connects. So, I was playing here with him, playing at either the whatever it was, a jazz festival or something, and I met someone, and we engaged in a long-distance relationship, and then, I had one of these down periods in music, like my first major one.
Okay,
I was like 24. And it was like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? My dad was right. I need something to fall back on, I need to go back to school. Plus, I don't understand the music business. And I had a record deal, and I had a record in waiting, and it hadn't been released yet. And there was some, the production team was now trying to get their own distribution. So they were moving away from Arista. So they assigned some of the contracts that they had, mine and a couple others or whatever. They just gave them to Arista Records. So now I'm on Arista Records.
Yeah,
like
big deal.
Me and Kenny G and Kashif and they didn't know what to do with me.
Yeah.
I knew what to do with me, but they didn't. I said, just call George Duke. He could produce me, or Marcus.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were like, they assigned some people that were just like, it was like they could do whatever.
Right.
So they did whatever. That was my second record. So I was feeling all of that. And, I don't have any gigs, or, and I don't understand what's happening, and I need to go back to school. Plus, I'm dating this girl, and okay, maybe I can find somewhere to go in Chicago and kind of kill two birds.
Yeah, right?
Oh, Lord, really?
Well, there's a lot of work, in Chicago, too, right? I mean, were you even thinking that way, though? No, you weren't thinking that way.
No. Just like one of my good friends, a famous guy now, was like, have you checked out the scene there? And I'm like, no, I mean, a little bit, but not really. I was just, yeah. But, wherever you go, there you are. And fortunately for me, I kept that philosophy rather than moving here and being like, oh, I can't do anything now that I'm here. I was like, I don't know what y'all are talking about, but I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Well, that's because I guess, because I was from there.
Right.
And things, not only that, but things had happened to me that weren't necessarily, it wasn't because I lived in New York necessarily. It wasn't because of any one thing. They just happened. It was like magic.
Yeah.
Like, does this happen to everybody? Right. So what does New York have to do with it? Yeah. I mean, Sonny Rollins was there, or, Al Haig was there, but
they might not have liked your vibe.
Right. Things came to me in similar ways in Chicago. I met Kenny Burrell. I got the gig with Miles here. I got the gig with Kenny Burrell here. So wherever you go, there you are. So, of course, I wasn't thinking about any of that. And I just moved and enrolled in Columbia College Arts, Entertainment, Media Management program.
It sounds pretty official.
Yes. Yes, it was. A little too official for my taste. But, I did it, and I got my undergrad degree and positioned myself here and started teaching. Got a teaching job at the American
And you were playing steady gigs around?
And I was playing all the time. After the first year, it took about a year to kind of get myself going and meeting people. And I started working all the time. And then the phone started to ring from New York. And can you go out on the road? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I'm doing the exact same thing I was doing at home. So, and I'm teaching, and okay.
Yeah. But that's also, I think, right at that, and during that era too, that's kind of when the coasts kind of get smaller, right? Because it's 2 hours to fly to New York. You can fly in and out. You were staying connected with everybody anyways.
That was my thinking. Now I don't know what guys in New York were thinking, because they could be like, what is he doing, and who does he think, and what,
right.
And I'm just thinking, I'm trying to appease myself, and by saying, okay, if I lived in New York, would it be about me doing local gigs 5 nights a week? I wouldn't want to exist doing that no matter where I live.
Right.
So I don't want to have to do that here. I don't want to have to do that there. I don't want to do that, so the vision was always to expand beyond my local scene and to have some reach in terms of my musicality or my sound on the instrument. So that was my goal, to develop myself on the instrument, whatever that meant. I had an idea, but I didn't know exactly how to do it or how.
Well, it's always to me, as an artist, right? It's always but you have to have thoughts. You have to have creativity, and you have to always continuously try to figure it out, and then you finally figure it out, right? Because you started, a couple of different trios in town that you worked with for many years, and you're probably thinking of the guys that you're playing with at that time. I want to play with these guys because I'm learning and I'm creating the sound that I want this way. Is that how you think about that stuff?
That's why I put it. So after years of just bouncing around and doing, hey, can you make this gig? I got a gig, blah, 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 blah. No, okay. Can you, and doing that, it was like, that's dead end. I'm not going to get anywhere doing that. So I'm looking at my models, my contemporary models. I need to write music for myself in a band and that's going to help me define a sound for myself and feel like and I need to have a band so that I can develop a sound for myself as an instrumentalist and maybe beyond that musically. Have a vision that is manifest in the band. It's in the music that we present.
How hard is that? I'm just going to stop right there because that's interesting to me. And I think that a lot of people do what you did at first, call anybody they possibly can, just to, let's fill this gig. First you start with the guys that are totally happening, and then you move down the list and stuff. And, great, you just played a gig. Great, you just played another gig. Great, we played Autumn Leaves again. Fantastic. We changed the world. That's awesome. So, but, I mean, when you started locking in and getting those groups together, how important is it for anyone, let's just talk in generalities outside of just you, to really work with 3, 2, 1 like-minded person regularly, maybe rehearse what a concept, and actually put things together regularly? Because otherwise, to me, as an artist, if you're constantly randomly putting people together, it'll sound okay, but you're not really going anywhere with it, right?
Right.
I mean, how important is that? Just talking generalities at first, if I can even talk, and then talk, for yourself specifically, because I think that's so important. I think a lot of times these days it's not happening that way.
I think in some instances you're right, it's not, and then others it's happening a little too. Like, there's a balance that needs to happen as far as I'm concerned. There's a practice, a method, a way that this music has evolved, jazz music that I'm talking about, any kind of music, like black music, whatever music. There's a mentor apprenticeship, so there's the mentoring model, which includes young musicians performing with elder musicians, younger less experienced musicians that performing with more experienced musicians. That's just the way that it should go, as much as possible, because before you play with people that have experience, what do you really know? And there's a lot of too much of that, or not enough of that, I should say. Not enough of that model. And it's for various reasons. It's not always the fault or anybody's fault necessarily, but it exists. So we have to find ways to deal with that and to keep that alive, that practice, because it's important to the music. Because the musicians, in my humble opinion, are the arbiters of this music, not the industry, not the press, not the presenters. The musicians know, and they kind of should control like who the next, because they understand what it takes, what it sounds like, what it feels like, what it is. So I don't know, I veered off there.
No, but I think you're right, because that's how you grew up, right? I mean, you were playing Al Haig is Giving
all
Back.
grew up.
Right.
That's how they all grew up, and that's how they continue to grow. When I think about Marquise Hill or Micaiah, or
absolutely.
I can name a bunch of guys that, it just happened to be me that now was the older guy, and I'm not saying anything, but that's how it worked.
Right.
You could tell certain guys were going to be doing it because of Marquise and a group of guys that he was in college with at the time, Christopher McBride and Ryan Neither, and a bunch of these guys were driving an hour and a half every week to see us play.
From NIU, I think, right?
NIU,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I've become intimately
the
aware
drive
of what they were actually doing, and saying, man, they were really dedicated because they felt that they could experience the music on a certain level, and they were that serious about doing it.
Well, and I remember when I was coming up and I was in college and doing all that stuff, and they always talked about, well, they kind of made you play with some of the instructors, at North Texas. I was playing with those guys, and you rose as much as you could rise at that moment to their level.
Yeah.
You were just, when you sat down and played, and then when I got in Chicago, same way, right? I mean, you're playing with the older guys that are better. You raise your game as much as you can.
As much as you can.
And if they keep playing, like if they're playing with you regularly, their game keeps raising if they have that conscious thought process. And those guys had that conscious thought process to constantly get better.
Right.
And that in turn probably changed the way you played a little bit too. Maybe inspired you in a way because you're giving back.
Most
right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's inspirational, just the energy and the reciprocal energy and all of that. But back to what you were talking about like, forming your identity in this music or in any music through putting your own music together, finding your own like-minded peers, so that's part of the equation, playing with your elders. The other part is having an identity, having a self, having your own thoughts, musical and otherwise, about how you can do this, who you are. Like, I don't need to do it just like this person, and so that's very important, and fortunately for me, that's something that I had.
Well, you're also consciously aware of that in your mind, right?
Yes.
Because some people go through the motions.
Maybe so. I knew that, okay, the two biggest figures at that time on my instrument, we're talking about the 80s, were Pat Metheny and John Scofield. And, I didn't sound like either one of them.
Yeah, right.
I've dabbled a little and tried to, do what I could just to be current. But by that point, I had recognized something in my own playing that I kind of liked and was pursuing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where my focus was. But I saw that in their forming groups, having their own original music, they had defined themselves as instrumentalists, like I said, and their music, their presentation. So I said, that's what I need to do.
Yeah.
So that's why I put the trio together and started writing and playing as much as possible. And that's what it was.
Well, and just to talk about the trio, right? One of the trios, and since we're sitting here now, April 3rd, you're actually doing a 20th anniversary of one of the trios, and you guys are playing one of the albums, right? In full stand,
right?
Which is at the Jazz Record Art Collective,
right?
At the Fulton Street Collective. So I mean, how about that?
I know
you're playing one of your classic albums.
I won't call it that, but I'm playing my first album. I'm playing this. That was the first trio album, really in earnest. Yeah, I mean, I did other things with the before that, but it wasn't the Bobby Broom trio.
Right.
So this was the first trio record, Stand. It was released on a label here that was out of here in Chicago, Premonition, and they had good distribution at the time. That was a nice.
I think Patricia
situation.
Barber was on there too at one point, right? Yeah, they had a lot of good distribution.
Yeah,
so you toured with that group, right? I mean, you got out.
Yeah, we got out. Yeah, we got out a little bit. We did. In spite of whatever. I remember hearing something on the radio on NPR. Yeah, well, the record did really well here in Chicago, but I wonder if he's going to be. What's the national response is? Like, what are you trying to asking me to fail or what's going on? Anyway.
Well, it's also. I mean, to be fair, right? It's really difficult to get a jazz trio or jazz quartet or any jazz thing out nationally. You're not comparing it apples and oranges to like J-Lo or something.
Right.
I mean, it's not the same thing.
No.
The fact that you get out, you get airplay, people are inspired by what you're doing, and when you go to different places, they come and see you. That's like a big win in the world of jazz.
I know.
Yeah.
It's huge. Yeah, and I've not for 1 second do I take that for granted. It's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because I've experienced it, and it's a curse because I don't experience it enough. And like anything, opportunity is super important. Every time we go out, anywhere around the country. I've been to Europe with the trio, with both groups, and some of these places I'm performing for the first time as a leader, and I'm nervous. Like, I don't know, like, do people even know?
That's the worst. By the way, that's the worst part as a leader. Outside of all the logistics and everything, you're sitting on stage. You're wondering, does anybody really know?
Or before you get to the stage,
Right,
is anybody coming? Do they care?
Right.
And I've never been disappointed.
Yeah.
I've always been pleased and surprised, and it's been great. So having tasted that, I say, well, why not, like, at least once a year? Why am I not going to Europe? Because when I went, we played real places, and it was great. So it's about opportunity, and some of that is timing and whatever.
Well, there's a lot to now as opposed to 30 years ago. The economics, whoever's running this thing, that thing, and everything else. I mean, it's so many different dynamics as opposed to like when there used to be like the circuits, back in the 50s and 60s. Like, oh yeah, you just go down through all these clubs. There's plenty of clubs. You just go through and all that stuff. So it's that challenge, And I know we talked a little bit before coming on about streaming and everything else, and it's kind of like in that era that people are still trying to figure it out.
Right.
I think in 10 years things are going to look a lot different. It's going to be a lot different from a marketing standpoint.
Yeah, I'm curious.
And jazz always is behind pop and rock and Latin because it is what it is. But I think what you're doing is like one of those things that you keep pushing. And the other thing, you keep pushing, but I mean, look at the opportunity you had. You opened up for Steely Dan with an organ trio. I mean, what?
Yeah.
And you didn't have to play, like, you could play whatever you want.
Right.
You're open up, and that allowed you to expose all these people to jazz.
Yeah.
And your style.
To me.
They would never, probably half those people would never even think about going to hear you play or any jazz player play until they heard you, and then they probably have frequented clubs.
Right. So, that was another one of those instances where I'm like, people, what's this going to be? These little three guys walk out on stage and, amongst this sea of equipment and Steely Dan's stage.
Is that Donald Fagen like pushing because I know he really digs?
Oh, they were both. Yeah, both of them. I think they came together. Donald Fagen and Walter Becker came together as jazz fans. They connected in college, and I think they shared that. And Donald had his stereo in the dressing room, and he was always playing something hip. Yeah. So they loved jazz. And, we were among the handful of organ trios that they've had over the years open for them. And it was a nice time. I did 2 of those tours, for 2 years. And, I didn't know. So fortunately, I played music that was accessible to the audience, too. That was the other thing that I thought was really cool. Like, I didn't have to change what I do. And I could, I'm kind of the age of, I grew up listening to Steely Dan.
Right,
I had a friend that every time I went to her house, she was playing Steely Dan. And I heard Asia just from going to her house, just hanging out. And I was a teenager. And so just to hear those songs backstage, it was like, oh, man. So... saying that to say I'm the age of the audience. They could relate to me playing House of the Rising Sun and playing Layla, and I'm sure they were like, "What?" So that was cool.
Well, and also you grew up in that era where you were influenced by R&B, rock, pop, jazz, everything. And, you know, we talked a little bit before we came on camera that I think, and I want to get your opinion on this, I think in this day and age, and that's part of the reason why I think everything's being sorted out right now online, is because I think the genre thing is slowly passing by to the point where, you know, you're going to be known as Bobby Broom. You know, you're going to be known as this person, that person. I mean, because there's so many genres that you're playing within your style.
Right.
And that's that opening up for Steely Dan, obviously doing that. But I mean, I've heard you play different jazz clubs, and you're playing Bobby Broom. You're not worried about whether or not you're playing. Oh, great! I'm at the jazz showcase. I got to play a tribute to Charlie Parker or something.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's your sound.
Yeah.
And I think more and more artists that are coming up now, or even that are currently happening, are working on more of like, this is my sound, man. I'm going to play my stuff. Is that how you're thinking about things these days?
That's how I've pretty much always thought about it. I remember it was probably in the 90s, so before I started recording those types of songs. And I remember having a daydream about doing that. Like, one day I want to play the songs of my youth, because that's the kind of music lover I was as a child. I mean, those songs are like my friends, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel very deeply when I hear certain things most things on the radio. Everything was good at that point for me. So I thought, you know, one day I'm going to be able to do that. But first, I need to develop an identity. So, meaning like a sound that warrants me playing a melody and having people care, and being able to put it across, being able to sell. You know, there's a lot to that. You know, you gotta be.
Otherwise, you're a cover band.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or, you know, it's something. So I knew that it was something that I wanted to do, and wow. You know, so.
Yeah. Well, so your last release, Soul Fingers, came out, and that's kind of what we're talking about, because you had a whole mixture of those 60s tunes. Ode to Billy Joel, one of my favorite tunes, by the way. I love that tune, man. It's like comes out of nowhere. I forget what movie it's from. Is it Billy Jack?
I don't even know. I don't know. I didn't know it was in a movie.
It's something crazy. I thought somebody came up to me and told me that.
Really?
One time when I played
I'll check
it.
that out.
But I mean, those tunes are so hip, but they're done in a trio setting. I think there's some horns on it at some point.
Yeah. There's horns on that tune, and a string section on a couple of tunes. Yeah. So I went kind of crazy.
But I mean, that to me, like, epitomizes what we're talking about here, right? I mean, so moving forward now, I know you're talking about different projects and things, and you're still playing a lot. You're obviously teaching at NIU. I mean, is there anything that everybody should kind of keep on their radar, or are you just kind of conceptualizing stuff? Right
I
now?
am conceptualizing stuff. I've got a trio with Dennis in the conceptualization stages.
Dennis Carroll, by the way.
Right,
His
Dennis Carroll,
bassist.
We've played together for long
time, yeah.
It's like 30 years.
You guys played at the Underground Wonder Bar, I think, together.
That's where we
that
started.
Had to be late, yeah.
Yeah, that's when the group started in 1992.
Wow.
Or one. Yeah. Woo. Yeah, baby.
Yeah.
So that's
when you find a good bass player,
that's what
those
happened.
are hard to find.
Yeah, I guess that's like Sonny and Cranshaw.
Right? Can replace everybody else, but keep that bass player
you gotta
close
keep
by,
somebody that you can talk to or remember stuff with. Yeah, so we've got something that I won't even talk about what it is yet, because I don't want anybody stealing my ideas. So we've got something that we're going to do this year, and I'll say it's another tribute concept.
Yeah, nice.
And kind of on the reminiscent of the Monk thing.
Well, and one more cool thing before we wrap this up. He's got this book here, 3 Questions for Today's Musicians.
Right.
Lillian, I'm not going to pronounce her last name because we will link it up below.
That looks like it may be French or something. I'm not going to mess with it. But
this is Bobby's in this book, included in this book, was some of the greatest jazz musicians.
Yeah, some of the great living
world,
jazz musicians of the past and the present, and I'm honored to be in it. And it's a spin-off on the Baroness de Koenigswarter's book that she did, I'm going to guess in the 50s or maybe the 60s. You know, she was the friend of all the bebop musicians, and this particularly Thelonious Monk. You know, they had a very close relationship. Anyway, she did a book, Three Wishes, I think it was called, where she asked famous musicians, if you had 3 wishes, what would they be? And so Lillian decided that she would spin off on that, you know, for today's jazz musicians.
That's cool.
It's really, really cool. So yeah, and there's actually another book that I just appeared in recently by Mark Stryker called Jazz in Detroit, and it's a history of Detroit jazz musicians, and they're pretty. There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Elvin Jones is on the cover. And so he talked to me about my association with Kenny Burrell. Yeah. And
we didn't even talk about that. We could be here for 4 hours. I know we have to have you come back at some point.
There's a lot of stuff I'm getting. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But so that's out too. So it's pretty cool, man. I mean, you know, it's got to feel good when people call you up and they want to include you in something that's going to be like a legacy. I mean, it's there, right?
Yeah. That is cool.
So, of course, everybody can get more information on everywhere you're playing.
Yep.
And the new recordings, all of the other recordings are available at bobbybroom.com.
Yes, they are.
And, of course, everywhere you can buy online recordings as well, Amazon, iTunes, all that other stuff. Yeah, right. It's like whatever. Well, I really appreciate you coming in, man. I know we've been talking about this a little bit and trying to put it together. And, you know, man, I really appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks so much, Bobby.
All right, man.
And, of course, you can see more of this issue on ChicagoJazzMagazine.com. And hopefully you will get out and see some live music. Hopefully you'll see Bobby performing somewhere soon. And until next time, we will see you somewhere out on the scene.